Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the 286 Project with me, Chris Akers. On this podcast, we talk about arts, culture, politics, sport, and anything else we can think of. Now, one of the major issues and major issues around the world at the moment, in mostly Western world especially, is about free speech. And I'm going to speak to someone now. His name is Tom Harris. He's from the Free Speech Union, and we're going to be talking all things free speech. Hello, Tom.
Hello, Chris. Good to be here. Good to join you and hello to everyone listening as well.
So, before I begin, I do this at the start of every interview. Can you have a small introduction to yourself?
Mm.
Also, why the Free Speech Union was formed in the first place?
So I don't come from a free speech union background or a free speech background or a political background. I was a professional actuary in the City of London for 25 years. What is an actuary? We're like accountants, but we predict the future rather than looking at accounts and looking at the past. So most of us are mathematicians. And I got to a point after COVID where I thought, you know what, I've been there, done that. So I kind of just gave myself a break. And what was incredible is that in that time, 4 months after I stopped working, an opportunity came up to join Toby Young in his team. Uh, Incredibly, it was a role as director of data and director of data and impact. Having been an actuary, looked at data all my career, I thought this kind of fits. Plus, I'm really interested and I've been following the Free Speech Union since it was started and got more and more concerned about the state of free speech in the country, even though I wasn't directly too involved in it. And so I applied. And incredibly, Chris, I got the role. So I've now been here 2 years. But the second part of your question, sort of why the Free Speech Union, how was it formed? It really is the brainchild of Toby Young, who is our general secretary. He's created it and put it together. And he was widely mocked back in February 2020 when he said, I'm going to put together a free speech union, because a lot of people said, why do we need a free speech? What is a free speech union? And I can assure you that in the 4 years since he set it up, if he hadn't created it, someone else would have had to create it. We have had 2,300 individual cases. Those are situations or people who've come to us for help. And the idea is that we will help anyone where their legal right to free speech has been in some way compromised or they've suffered a penalty simply for exercising their legal right to free speech. Now, clearly, there are legal limits on free speech. You can't incite violence and you can't defame people. But as long as it's legal rights that people have been exercising, we'll come in and we'll support them. So Toby set it up actually after he had his own cancellation experience in 2018. And he was going to be given an appointment in Theresa May's government. And the Twitter mob sort of got on his back, and eventually he had to step away from that opportunity, and at the same time lost a lot of other income streams, and realized that this cancel culture, well, it came to hit him, and he realized I want to do something about this. I want to help people. So that was the genesis of it.
So, simple question: why is free speech important?
Free speech, the simple questions are the hard questions. I've been worried about that, Chris, because you ask really good, simple questions. They are hard questions. They're questions that if you really go too deep, you can't sleep at night. Why is free speech? Free speech is the foundational freedom on which we build everything else. Free speech enables us to talk about ideas, good ideas, bad ideas, ideas that you think are beyond the pale, ideas that have, without which we wouldn't have created all the wonderful things around us. And out of free speech comes free expression, freedom of religion, academic freedom, freedom in the arts, all the things that make life worth living, and of course democratic freedoms. So the ability to speak, to express ourselves, to say things, it stops us from going down the route of violence, really. I believe if we have, that's the alternative. We don't have free speech. There's no other way of working out which ideas win. It's might is right. But genuinely, I think with free speech, it teaches us that the pen is mightier than the sword, and that we really can make a difference by speaking and writing and communicating. And the idea that free speech is somehow under threat, it filled me when I realized it was, with horror. So free speech is fundamental.
Does everybody have the same access to free speech in this day and age, or has that changed over the last few years?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. And I would say that it's never been the case that everyone has the same access to free speech. Societies are never completely equal in that way. And there's always power structures in all societies, which mean that certain people find themselves freer. If you don't need, for example, to make an income, then you don't need to abide by a code of conduct in a workplace, because you don't need to be in a workplace. So you are freer to say things if you don't need to get an income than if you do. So there are natural ways in which society is put together that mean that free speech and the restrictions on free speech vary from situation to situation. I think that's inevitable. But I think the principle of free speech, certainly as we go about our daily lives as citizens of the country, just going out to restaurants or going out and meeting friends, meeting family, we all should have the same access and be treated equally under the law.
You said earlier, when you talked about the Free Speech Union and work it does, and you said there's certain limits to free speech, and you talked about exercise, obviously not inciting violence as one of them. What other limits are there in regards to what you can and can't say, or is that the only one?
There are different views, as you would expect,
Yeah.
on what are the limits of free speech. There are free speech absolutists who would say, do you know what? It is better for the most ghastly things to be said in the open, so that they are out in the open where they can be destroyed, mocked, using every other tool there is, and pointed out and said, that is such a dumb idea, and put into the laughing stock of the public square. And that the absolutists would say that's actually the best way of thrashing out this battle of ideas. And in that way, there are no limits to free speech. However, when you start to think about it, I think you find there are inevitably limits to free speech. So, I mean, the violence, the incitement to violence is in essence using your speech in a very imminently violent way. And I don't think anyone would defend that in today's day and age. I also think defamation is another important one. People have if your reputation is dragged through the mud unjustly by someone throwing around accusations that are just not true, I think people need to have recourse and say, do you know what? You've destroyed me. You've destroyed my life because of what you said. And also, and this perhaps is a bit more controversial, of course, is state secrets. So things like the Official Secrets Act, whereby you have to keep things in order to keep all the people safe. There are certain things that need to stay hidden from people and can't be said openly in regard to classified information and such like. I mean, the obvious example being the nuclear codes and such like. There's just information in order to have a running society with a functioning government that also would create in effect a limit on free speech. But I do like the idea of coming back to the ideal of a free speech absolutist, and that open public square as much as possible. And I think that's what we try at the Free Speech Union to think about as well.
The point you made about state secrets being one limit of free speech, who decides? Well, it leads on to another question, basically. Who decides when free speech can and can't be used? So to give you an example, if you remember the whole COVID WhatsApp messages, those are put in the public eye, which they weren't supposed to be. But yeah, basically allow the public to see what the government was saying during the whole
Yeah.
last pandemic, for instance. And a lot
Yeah.
of people, actually, that was a good thing. So who would decide when free speech can be used and when it can't be used?
And we come back to that initial point about power structures in society, don't we? There are so many examples of what you say. The Twitter files are a really good example as well, where we suddenly discovered after Elon Musk bought Twitter, he released these files that showed the way in which the former Twitter had been effectively coerced by Biden to say certain things, or the Biden administration to say certain things and not to say other things, or to push certain narratives and to suppress certain other narratives. And the thing that's come out since then is that those narratives that were being suppressed actually have turned out to be most likely true, such as the COVID-19 virus link did indeed come from a lab in the Wuhan area, and that was being suppressed during the COVID-19. So there's some fantastic examples of what you say, where yes, these things have been suppressed and then proved to be true. And I think on this one, I think the whole area of misinformation and disinformation is quite chilling. I have no solutions to that other than we do. Going back to the point about power, ironically, we do need sort of people like Elon Musk who have the power and have the punch to reveal these things to us at certain times. But at the end of the day, a functioning democracy where people are accountable to the electorate has to be the right ultimate solution to that, where you can get those WhatsApp messages and you can show them to the public. And alongside that, a free press. I mean, so often it's been the free press that has revealed this, and often been very often been stopped, or the attempt to stop the free press by the government has been terrifying when we realize how much that's happened. But bold journalists, courageous journalists, we need them. Even the freest societies need our journalists. So in some ways, it's all the people that we love to scorn, isn't it? We love to scorn our politicians, but we need brave politicians, and we love to scorn journalists. Oh, the articles aren't right, or whatever it is. But we need our journalists, and they are, I think, the sort of defense mechanisms against this happening, because it's going to happen again. I mean, nothing is going to be perfect, unfortunately, Chris.
Again, sticking with the government theme, you're starting to see certain countries now implement what you call hate speech laws. And one of them is Ireland, Republic of Ireland. And I've been trying to follow this closely, although I don't know the exact details of the actual bill. So could you, in summary, just put out what the bill is, and also has it actually been implemented yet?
Great questions. And you know what, Chris, the whole area of hate speech bills in Ireland, in Scotland, in Northern Ireland, and worryingly potentially in England, but not yet, is a whole discussion. But yeah, let's talk about Ireland. So there is a bill that has been running rapidly through the process in the Republic of Ireland, and the bill is called, or I think it was called, it might have changed name. It was called the Criminal Justice Incitement to Violence or Hatred and Hate Offences Bill, and I think it's going through Ireland's Senate imminently. And we're the Free Speech Union. We've been talking to and certainly trying to help as much as we can. Free Speech Ireland, who are working to raise awareness of what this bill is actually going to mean for free speech. And it's not good, because if this is passed, it will make it a crime to say anything in person or online. And I am cribbing, by the way, here, which it will make it a crime to say anything in person or online which someone from a protected category, whether that's race, gender, religion, sexuality, whatever they deem to be hateful or offensive. So the issue there is it's a perception-based test. So the person who's on the receiving end of a particular piece of speech they perceive that to be a hate crime, then the bill will say, yep, that's a hate crime. And you could go to prison for 5 years. So if you make the wrong enemy at the wrong time by saying the wrong thing, they can come at you using this. They can weaponize this bill, and you could end up in a bad place. The other thing is it also makes it a crime just to prepare or to possess material that might incite hatred. So that might be you have something on your computer that someone in the authorities deem to be offensive, or you own a controversial text. Now, some might say that the Bible's a controversial text. So, potentially owning the Bible, having the Bible in your home in Ireland after this law comes in could be a problem. So the Irish public are waking up to this problem and to what this law will mean in practice. But worryingly, there were the Dublin riots last year, and they were obviously appalling. And there were lots of violence over a couple of days. And Leo Varadkar actually afterwards has decided, almost put his foot on the accelerator for this bill now, and said, right, this is what we need. Rather than saying, well, maybe we need to go out and police the streets and stop this from happening using the laws we already have. He's going and trying to accelerate this hate crime, this very fundamentally flawed and very chilling hate crime bill in Ireland. So the public in Ireland are gradually becoming more and more aware of it. It was almost they were almost sort of looking right, and meanwhile the law was rushing through on the left. I think people are waking up to it now and realizing that it would be horrendous. But I don't know if it's too late to stop it.
So say you have someone who's been told that they said something hateful and they're taken to court. Is it up to that person to prove that it wasn't hateful? Where does the basically who would have to prove what? For instance, would it be more on the actual defendant, or the prosecution have to prove it?
Well, so the argument that's being run at the moment is that it would still be, it will have it's not going to be such a radical change as everyone's saying. That's what the defenders of this law are saying. They're saying, the normal defenses of, look, I didn't think it was hateful, and I don't actually believe that it was hateful, and I think that actually there's a bit of sort of over exaggeration on the point of the complainant. They're saying that don't worry, it's going to be okay. But the worry is that if you look at where other places in the direction of travel, even actually where there haven't been explicit laws against this kind of stuff, the direction of travel is that's exactly what happens. Things that were not meant to be caught in the net of the new legislation do get caught. I mean, the good example I come back to is Christianity in the United Kingdom. A lot of things that are Orthodox Christian belief are clamped down on. I mean, example would be street preachers. We, in our casework, have seen again and again street preachers who've been in this country for centuries. We've had people sort of proclaiming the gospel from the street for centuries. And now police officers are coming by and saying, excuse me, but you're not allowed to say that. And that is already happening. And that's the direction of travel with the level of hate crime we already have in the statute books, in the laws at the moment. And we were told, oh, don't worry, that won't happen, but it has. And I think that's the concern when you then start to codify a perception-based hate crime. So the idea of hate is not well defined at all. Then because of the way culture is going and the way society has already gone, that's the direction of travel. The reality is that however many assurances are given, people will use this new law in order to shut down people's speech, people's free expression, people's religion, Orthodox religion, and particularly in this culture of sort of the victim culture, where it's how many victim points do you have determines kind of how you're treated effectively in society.
But this easily have the opposite effect. So if certain groups are being, I don't say target is probably the wrong word, but certain individuals basically can say things more than others or say less than others. Could you have a discrepancy there? And that basically almost makes a mockery of, well, one of the mockeries of the law, in that it could divide people a lot more than actually stop all this hate speech that they're hoping it gets done.
Well, I think the answer to that, I think, lies in looking around where we are today in many ways. When you say, do these things cause more division or less division? Do we feel that our society today is more divided than it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago? And I think the answer is complex. I don't think it's a slam dunk. But I think most people would say that the sense of cohesion in society has been drip, 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 eroded away. And these, in England, it would be the Equality Act of 2010, and this sort of, oh, I've got these characteristics. Oh, you've got those characteristics. I win, and you can't say that because that, I'm gay or I'm straight or whatever. That has become to the front now of our public discourse, and it's a mixture of things. Yes, I do think it is the law. I do think in England it's been the Equality Act, but I think that's kind of fed the culture as well. So it's always which comes first, the culture, the law, the culture. I think they have worked hand in hand to create this division. So yeah, I think there is an unintended consequence of these laws. They're meant to bring society together in a very micro way, they might, but in a longer term way, they actually end up causing division and making the lines between people even sharper.
One of the episodes, because I started this podcast last year, and one of the episodes I had a few months ago was with a professor who talked about the online harms bill,
Yeah,
or no, online safety bill. I think at the time it was just going through the House of Lords, and I think it might have passed now. Has
yeah.
since then, has there been any unintended consequences that have happened already? And have the Free Speech Union had any particular cases that they've had to deal with as a result of this bill going through Parliament?
It's a great question. I can't off the top of my we as I said, 2,300 cases coming in already before the online safety bill came in. I can't off the top of my head think of an instance yet where the existence of that law now on the statute books has triggered a case. But I'm sure there must be. I'm sure I just can't do it off the top of my head. These things tend to take a while, I think, when a new law comes in. The Equality Act came in 2010, and the real sort of, and I think that is many ways the genesis of what we might call the cancel culture that has now infected everything.
Mhm.
And we can talk about that because you may disagree. But I think that it didn't feel like that in 2010 or 11 or 12, even 14, 15. It was only 15, 16, 17, 18, some 7, 8 years later that suddenly, oh goodness me, we have a problem. We have cancel culture, although a lot of people said we don't. A lot of people denied that. I think there is a slight difference with online stuff, which is that you know companies have to react very rapidly to that. Companies like Twitter, companies like Facebook, and also you've got digital content laws coming in the EU. And of course, although we're not in the EU anymore, companies like to keep things simple and they don't want lots of different processes. So what the EU does actually affect us, even if it might be indirectly. So the online world is governed by these very few large companies, and they've changed their policies to reflect the online safety bill requirements. And we're going to start to see it. I mean, the thing is, I would say, Chris, is we're already seeing the shutting down of gender critical views, for example, and so it's going to be very difficult to discern it getting worse,
Yeah.
if you see what I mean.
Just going to ask you actually on gender critical views, because aren't those now protected under the Equality Act? Is that correct?
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right.
So And yet you still have companies that are firing people as a result. Is that just a misunderstanding of the law completely, or why is the reason for that? I know Joe Phoenix was the latest one who won her case, but why is that still happening even though the law's not on their side?
Such a good question. And it's one I've been wrestling with because the For-Starter finding, it was a famous employment tribunal finding, and Meyer For-Starters established exactly what you just said, which is that gender critical views are a protected belief under the Equality Act and passed what's called the Granger test, 5 tests that enable you to prove that something's a protected belief. And yet, we're still seeing this constant flow of cases and instances of gender critical people being fired. And I think there are a number of reasons. I think it's easy, it's not, it's always get muddled as to which way around this phrase normally goes, but it's, you can't overestimate or underestimate, you can't overestimate just how powerful the transgender and the gender identity ideological lobby is, and also how embedded it is in workplaces. The NHS, for example, has got all the trusts have these transgender. But we keep stumbling across these transgender policies that essentially are saying you need to go further than the law in protecting the rights of transgender people. And it's really important to say in all of this that there are vulnerable groups that we're talking about, vulnerable people. You know, transgender people are vulnerable and do deserve protections, as do people who believe in biological sex are also vulnerable and deserve protections. But it's about balancing these things in practice. And we find in the NHS that it's gone so far. People are terrified of speaking out as believing in biological sex and the importance of women's only spaces. And this is after Meyer For-Starter. I think it's so embedded culturally. It's so embedded in multiple layers. So it's not just who you might work for. It would also be who regulates you. And it
Yeah,
might also be some government department and someone who sits over a government department. There are these layers in society of authorities. And even the government, even people like Kemi Badenoch at the top of the government says, I want this to happen. And it doesn't. I mean,
yeah,
we've seen this with multiple home secretaries. They try and do something and nothing happens because
yeah,
it's almost like there's nothing, you pull the lever and it's not connected because there are so many, whether it's quangos, organizations, regulators, groups of society, different kinds of bureaucracy between the government at the top and little old us, you know, sat at our desk,
mm,
that you don't get the connection. And
yeah,
so so I've heard it described as like a Japanese knotweed, and that trying to tear it out is really, it's going to be really tough to do. And just changing the law, while great and fantastic, and it the trouble is, it means the only way then to get your justice done is to go through an employment tribunal, which then fines for you because of Meyer For-Starter saying that gender critical views are protected. But you have to go through all that. You have to pay for that. You have to go through the sleepless nights. You don't know where that process is going to end. Are you really going to win? You can't be 100% sure. And so the process is the punishment. So there are I could say so much on that, Chris, actually, because it's a really frustrating thing that the law's changed, and yet we're still seeing these organizations sort of penalize people for gender critical views. And 40% of our cases still are gender in 2023. So this is post Meyer For-Starter. 40% of our cases relate to this issue. So it's just
yeah.
astonishing.
So 40% relates to that issue. What other major issues surrounding free speech do the Free Speech Union deal with? So you talked about gender critical
Yeah.
views. Is there any particular other block that the Free Speech Union deal with as well?
As director of data, when you say that, Chris, all I can see in my head is my data categories kind of zoom into the room and I can see them in front of me. So our main data categories are obviously gender and sex. That would include homosexuality, transgenderism, pronouns, compelled speech around pronouns. Then we have race. So within our race category, we'd have things like critical race theory, white privilege, and others of these ideas that have sort of had their genesis in some of the universities in the US, funnily enough. And then we would have religion. So within religion, we would have Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, and other. If we get a bunch of cases to do with any specific thing, we'll tend to carve that out, and that becomes a new category. Then we have politics. Now, politics is kind of a catch-all, and that would include things like Israel-Palestine actually falls under politics, where people get in trouble for their views on Israel-Palestine. Immigration, people get in trouble for their views on immigration. That would be in politics. And I'm just trying to think what else we have. Well, interestingly, we also had a COVID-19 category because a lot of people were getting in trouble for their view on the vaccines or their view on whether it was a lab leak, of course, in those days. But that as a category is kind of dying away as the pandemic goes into the rearview mirror. But I would say those are our major sort of umbrella categories. We got lots of subcategories within all of those, though.
Just going back to the whole gender critical views, but taking a slightly different approach, does it surprise you? Because a lot of those views tend to be some in the workplace, but a lot of them are outside the workplace. Does it surprise you that there's not even a law to say that a company cannot basically dictate what you say outside of the workplace? As long as you say, oh, it's not representative of my company. To me, that surprises me that, well, I say surprising, you probably shouldn't in this day and age, but to me, it just seems odd that there's not a law that says you can't dictate what an employee says outside of work if it's nothing to do with the company.
Another question right at the razor sharp edge of the free speech battle, because you're right, we have Article 10 rights under the European Convention for Human Rights. Article 10 talks about freedom of expression. Those are absolute rights that we have as citizens of the United Kingdom. And no company can take those Article 10 rights away from us. And yet, they, as you say, they seem to be wanting to do that. Now, at one extreme, an employer has a right to have a code of conduct and to say, if you're in my office and working for me, we want you to behave. We don't want you to bring controversial things into the office. We want the office to be a particularly place where everyone feels comfortable, et cetera, et cetera. And at some basic level, I think codes of conduct have been with us for all time, and we've all kind of known it when we've seen it, and we'll say, yeah, of course, we're fine with that. But you're right, now it's this, well, you've brought us into disrepute by what you said on Twitter, or you brought us into disrepute by what you've said on Facebook. And it may well be that item thing you said was 20 years ago. And we have this phrase of offense archaeology, where companies, or complainants rather, go back 20 years, 10 years, 5 years, whatever it is. And some of these employees might have been 15 or 10 and just young and stupid. When I was young and stupid, I mean, we were outside climbing trees, falling off trees, and I probably did really dumb things, said stupid things. If they had been caught on camera on constant stream of recording equipment, I probably would never have held a job down. But no one will ever know any of the stuff that I spoke about when I grew up. But that's changed, and I think there needs to be a right to forget within a certain number of years or whatever it is. So it's like a statute of limitations. And also, if a company's going to say, look, you brought us into disrepute, the company then has to prove it. Okay, how much money did you lose because of this? What was the direct line of sight between what was said over here and the disrepute? Or is it just you're terrified of your own employees who are all don't believe in gender critical views? You're terrified of them, and therefore you want to shut this person down. And so I think it's about working out those principles in a social media world. But the companies are not remembering Article 10 rights, and that is worrying.
We've talked about Southern Ireland. So you said earlier about Northern Ireland, which I've only briefly skimmed over.
Yeah.
Basically, what's the differences between their if it's a hate speech bill and what their Southern Ireland bill? Are there any major differences between the two?
Yeah, so there are different stages. The Southern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, is really is whizzing through, really, as we speak, and it's kind of caught people off guard. The Northern Irish bill, I think it's fair to say, more people are aware of. It's had quite an involved consultation process. In fact, we at the Free Speech Union got involved in that. It all goes back to something called the Marinan Review in 2020, which was looking at current hate speech in Northern Ireland and saying, do we need to do something like what Scotland's done? Do we need to review this? And as soon as that report looking into it was published, then the Northern Irish Department of Justice immediately accepted 22 of the 34 recommendations, including those that create a new statutory aggravation for what's called sectarian prejudice. So if a crime was committed with a sectarian dimension, which of course is very, very relevant to Northern Ireland, the sentence would be higher than if it was an ordinary crime. So all of this was accepted just like in an instant by that Department of Justice in Northern Ireland. Of course, the complicated thing in Northern Ireland is the Stormont, which would be needed to get an act through, hasn't been sitting. But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I've been embedded in free speech world stuff so much. I think Stormont may be coming back very soon. So that is a worrying time because we are concerned in particular. When we did the consultation, and we actually did a Northern Ireland poll as the Free Speech Union, and we noticed this pattern of organizations and quangos saying, oh yes, we need to clamp down on free speech, and individuals saying, no, don't. No, free speech really matters. I'm slightly caricaturing it, but that's what we saw in the data, and that is really worrying because those voices from organizations and quangos and non-governmental organizations are powerful and seem to be getting more traction through the consultation process. So there's another phase to the consultation which is imminent, and then we will see where it goes. But the worry is, we've had the Scottish hate crime bill, which has passed, and I think the only issue there is the police have said we don't really know how to police this. It's so complicated. It's not practical to police this hate bill. Northern Ireland is going through this consultation process. I think the worry is, well, what's going to happen in England, Wales? What that would be the big brother kind of bill to come in, and so that may well be our next fight. But for now, we're absolutely fighting in Northern Ireland, and even still in Scotland. We've got a Scottish office at the Free Speech Union to focus on the very specific issues in Scotland.
You say you're wondering what England and Wales will do. Obviously, we've got an election this year. So has there been any hints from the major political parties in regards to anything to do with free speech, what they'll say, what they'll do, what they'll say is hate speech, etc.?
Yeah, there have. I mean, it's often difficult to discern where the free speech issues lie in the proposed legislation, because the legislation that's being set out at the moment in manifestos, well, they haven't been written yet, but when they are set out in manifestos, are maybe about something that doesn't immediately seem to relate to free speech. And it's only when you look in the detail. The devil is always in the detail. And you say, my goodness me, this is going to... A good example is something called the Workers' Protection Bill. And what that sounds great, protect workers, it was going to improve rights. But what that meant was that if a waiter or a waitress overheard something that upset them from a customer, then effectively the owner of the business would be liable for that, because this person wasn't even their employee. It was just a customer off the street, but they said something horrible to one of their employees, and the employer would be liable for the hurt done to the employee. So it was a real frightening thing that was just slipped in to the workers' protection bill, and thankfully we spotted it and were able to whip it out. But I think the concern is one of the concerns is conversion therapy, which is a complicated area. Goes back to the transgender and gender in general area, where there's a real issue of understanding our terms, because I don't think anyone denies that saying it's not, no one says we should be putting electrodes all over gay men like we used to convert them. That's what used to happen. That was conversion therapy, and there was sort of coercion to say, we'll you're not gay, you do this or take this medicine. And you remember, I mean, Alan Turing had chemical castration, of course, and ended up committing suicide. Not necessarily directly related, we don't know, but that was the sort of thing that happened. No one is saying that wasn't abhorrent. But I think the language that's being used makes it seem like the conversion therapy is being talked about is that, whereas what it might be is simply telling a parent, oh, your son thinks he's a girl, and telling the parent, and the parent saying, well, can we have another conversation about this? Can we go and speak to a professional about this before we go down a medical route? Can we go and have some counseling and see what's going on? And that is kind of now called conversion therapy. So there's a real language issue here, which is the trick. We see it again and again. It sounds kind. It sounds obvious that we should be opposed to conversion therapy, but you've got to look under it. What's really being said? What's really being proposed? And I think that's something, say, if Keir Starmer gets in, I think he's already said, we're going to get a blanket ban on conversion therapy. And I just think, tell us what you mean. Are you talking about the old-fashioned thing, which we think is illegal already? Are you talking about coercion of young, gay, vulnerable gay boys and girls? Who still, I think there is an issue there in some religious settings where there is a sort of closed community and potential coercion. There probably is protection that's needed for some of those most vulnerable people. But on the other hand, are you going as far as saying that a parent can't take some time with their child to go and speak to a professional about a muddled time they're going through? Well, those are very, very different propositions, but they're being put together and called conversion therapy. And we've got to be precise. We've got to be clear, and we've got to be detailed. And language is really slippery. The language gets all the kind words get thrown into the debate by one particular side, normally the side that wants to shut down free speech.
One area where free speech has become more prevalent is sport, which is mainly my area.
Yeah.
And at the time when we arranged this, obviously we had this issue with this Newcastle fan, Lindsay Smith. I know the Free Speech Union is involved in this. I'm not sure how much you can say, but just a basic outline in regards to what happened. Because when I heard this story, I thought it just blew my mind, because it involves a major Premier League side, involves the Premier League themselves. It's just crazy. Just explain what happened.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I hope I'm not giving anything away here by saying that quite a few people in the Free Speech Union, we all love our sport, but Toby's absolutely obsessed with football. But a lot of the rest of us, myself included, I haven't got a clue about football. So we've been learning, how does the offside rule work? To try and sound like we know what we're talking about. But it's not going to work, I don't think, Chris. But anyhow, what happened with Lindsay? It was another gender critical case. So Lindsay's a lesbian. She's an absolutely avid Newcastle United Football Club supporter. She goes to however many games she can. But she got told that a complaint had been made about her because some of her tweets that were gender critical and that was, expressing gender critical views about, a man can't become a woman and a woman can't become a man. And the complainant, I think, was a transgender person who went to Newcastle United Football Club, NUFC, and said, I don't feel safe in the stadium. you know, I'm raising a complaint. This obviously came back to Lindsay. She got told this by the club. And interestingly, the club also reported her to the police. Thankfully, the police said no case to answer, but that was only after 2 hours of interviewing under caution. And 2 hours of interviewing under caution is not a trivial thing. You know, that is a stressful thing. And I'm only talking about things that are in the public domain. It was reported in the Telegraph on Friday evening and Saturday, and in the Daily Mail as well. And what I'm talking about here is exactly what's being reported there. So anyone who wants to can go and Google Lindsay Smith Daily Mail or Lindsay Smith Telegraph, and you'll be able to see the facts of the case. But what was chilling about this? So the police said no case to answer. Was that the Premier League got involved, and there is what came back after a subject access request to Lindsay was a dossier on her from the Premier League sort of investigation unit had put together and handed over to Newcastle United. And it included photographs of her. I think she was walking her dog. It included photographs of areas close to where she lived, and indications that the target, she was called a target, where she was, she had ties to certain parts of the area. And it was this kind of thing, page after page. And, this unit was probably set up for, really noble reasons, good reasons, to try and root out hooliganism and racism in the game, and to sort of target those ringleaders of racism in the game. I think it was set up around about 2019, but it's kind of been deployed now to target people like Lindsay Smith, who's done nothing wrong and is just expressing herself on Twitter. And there's another element to this, which is that, of course, this personal information was collected. It shouldn't really have been collected at all, and then was handed over to Newcastle United Football Club. Well, this is private information. This is personal information. We have GDPR in this country. So, we also have, I think Lindsay's also put a complaint into the Information Commissioner's office to say, why is my personal information, A, being collected, and B, being handed from one private organization to another private organization? I'm not given any consent for this. So there's a complaint running on that. But the phrase that was used is, and this really sums it up, Chris, I think, the stadium Stasi. It's what it is. But my thought on it is, well, at least in East Germany, the Germans knew they were being spied on. I mean, everyone knew the Stasi was collecting information on everyone. It wasn't a surprise. In this case, a private company has been collecting this dossier information on an individual fan, and with no clue, comes out the blue. So that is the story, and it's attracted a lot of attention, quite rightly, because football's such a big deal, and fans are appalled, I think, that this has gone on. And we've got a little tool on the website whereby people can look. You can send a form for a subject access request if they are a Premier League football club supporter. They can send a subject access request into their football club and also into the Premier League to see what information they've got, because a bit like the old non-crime hate incident, NCHI, there are a lot of people. We found there were hundreds of thousands of people who had these things taken out against them, and they didn't know. So that's what we're saying to people. If they think in any way they might have been targeted in this way, or that it's a possibility, to find out.
At the time this will go up, I think it'll be a couple of weeks since this incident occurred.
Yeah.
Have you, just simple yes or no, really, have you had any more incidences of fans come to you and say, actually, this has happened to me too, where I've been banned from a stadium? Because that to me just seems bizarre at a club. Why not just ban her? I don't understand. Even if I did it, at least, okay, ban her, fine, that's what you want to do. But
yeah,
there's more incidents of this.
Well, there's nothing like this. The dimensions to this individually We see every day, you know, things like people being reported for having gender critical views and expressing them on Twitter. We see that reported every day. Or even people getting the police involved when really it's not a police matter. We see that every day. What we don't see is this dossier, this dossier being collected on an individual. I don't think we've seen that. Obviously, it has resonances of you remember the Nigel Farage case
Just going to
and
say, yeah,
Coots?
Nigel Farage, and that's it, yeah.
Yeah, the word dossier kind of immediately brings that to mind. And I just think why are companies not learning that yeah, you shouldn't be collecting all this information on people. It's not A, it's just not right, and B, it's not going to end well because you know, we people these things get out eventually. And in the Nigel Farage case, I think it was just so embarrassing, so embarrassing. And of course, it ended up with the scalp of the chief executive as a result, because it was just kind of got worse and worse and worse as the story went on. So we'll see in 2 weeks whether it's still, you know, where it is. At least the free speech news cycle, Chris, moves so quickly. So I'm glad we've been able to talk about a lot of concepts as well as specifics, because specifics change so quickly.
I find it amazing that Newcastle United did this to her because of was it basically a tweet that she said, or just remind me, was it she
I think
said
it was
something?
several tweets. So she's, you know, she's a proud gender critical, outspoken gender critical feminist. And so I think there were several tweets that went out, and there was one, I think there was one complainant. I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, so it wasn't, I don't think it was an individual tweet. I mean, it might have been one that was complained about. I don't know that level of detail. But it was certainly, as I say, it's not unusual for a social media user to get reported. That's not unusual. It's the sort of what happened next, which has interestingly become one of our internal jokes when we talk about things like someone said something on Twitter or someone said something on Facebook. I bet you can guess what happened next, because you know, it's just crazy response to what should be just normal everyday free speech.
I find it incredible that this has happened to her by a club that's owned by um, men with much wealth from Saudi Arabia. I just think the irony there is just, yeah,
Yes, I think they probably hold gender critical views in Saudi Arabia. I mean, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm
yeah,
probably 90% sure they hold gender critical views.
yeah. So finally, because it's been a pleasure talking about this, you said it there. What happens next? What do you believe could happen next? And more pertinently, what do you want to happen next with regards to how we deal with free speech in this country?
Yeah, I think it's important to be realistic. It's important to have some optimism. We've got to look forward to things and be positive. But we've also got to be realistic about where we are and the battles that, I mean, I was thinking when ahead of this discussion, I was thinking about some of the most depressing things in the free speech world. And I find it difficult to get more dismayed than by the fact that the teacher from the Batley Grammar School, where the cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad was shown, more than, I think it might now be 3 years later, is still in hiding. You know, that to me is perhaps one of the most dismaying things. And I think that's going to be a battlefield for the future, is to uh, work out in our society how we enable freedom of religion and to coexist with an absence of blasphemy laws. We do not have blasphemy laws, but blasphemy laws are being brought in by the back door. I think we're going to win, and in some ways, I think we already have won the gender crit. Albeit we've got crazy things going on right as we have the camera on today. I think we're going to win the gender critical war because we have to. I just think that, yeah, you know, it's obvious. It's obvious we're going to be able to speak again freely about women and men, and we're going to be able at the same time to look after the most vulnerable people in minority sexual groups. We're going to be able to work that through. I haven't got any concern that in 10, 15, 20 years, that's going to be where it needs to be. I'm much more worried about things like a Batley Grammar School situation and where that goes. I'm also concerned about self-censorship. I think instead of saying it's a free country down the pub or whenever with our friendship groups, in family groups, in the most casual things that are going on in everyday life, we used to say it's a free country. It's a free country. Now we find ourselves saying, you can't say that. That seems to be a natural thing for our friends, families. You can't say that. You can't say that. Instead of it's a free country. That is very powerful. That to me says something very fundamental has changed. And that again, I think we have to be able to switch that back. Instead of saying you can't say that, we need to switch back to it's a free country. And it's that self-censorship. We've got to regain the confidence to have the battle of ideas in the open in a way that we might be beginning to forget. So I'm very confident, though. People dismiss generations, don't they? They say, oh, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, whichever is next. They say, oh, we're doomed, we're doomed. We never are. Every generation has its wonderful characteristics, and they rediscover something fantastic about this funny old thing we call life, or free speech, freedoms. And I'm very optimistic that will happen, because people are not nuts. They're not crazy. And a lot of people who are in the next generation are going to come and they're just going to sweep it away and say no. And I'm excited about that. I'm not excited that it might be longer than I might be dead, but it's going to happen. And that makes me feel good. But for now, it's really about picking a side, and I'm very happy to be on the side of free speech, freedoms. I pick my side.
If people want to find out more about the Free Speech Union, where can I go to?
Our website is freespeechunion.org. And if you go there, you'll see how to join the organization, how to find out more about the organization. There's lots of little videos about people we've helped, the freedoms that we defend. Things like the Lindsay Smith case are there. And we've got events. It'd be great to see people at an event, have a glass of wine, chat about freedom. But freespeechunion.org, that's where we are.
I'll leave a link to the website in the description of this video for when it goes out on YouTube. Tom Harris, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you for coming onto the podcast.
Chris, it's been an honor. Thank you.
Thank you.